Welcome, everyone, to SpeakUp Talks. Today I'm joined by CEO of SpeakUp, Tim Morris. Welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to be here as always. I think we have a really good conversation teed up and, especially on a day, for our industry, that's so important.
Yeah, indeed. So today is a special day. It's July 30th, which is actually National Whistleblower Appreciation Day in the United States.
Yeah, I mean, it's fantastic that exists, given, whistleblowers, you kind of only hear about them when things blow up, right?
Yeah.
And we often think about it in like the broader context, especially in politics. But when we think about whistleblowing or speaking up, it runs a lot deeper than that throughout companies throughout the world, and all of these little things really help make the world a better place. So it's really important to commemorate the day and those who are brave enough to speak up.
Definitely, and I think it's maybe useful for the listeners to give a little background information about what the day actually is and how it started. So first of all, National Whistleblower Appreciation Day is to acknowledge whistleblowers, honor their contribution, but also emphasize the role that they play in creating ethical and accountable workplaces. And actually, from a historical perspective, I think this is quite an interesting story that National Whistleblower Appreciation Day commemorates the very first whistleblowing protection law that was actually enacted all the way back in 1778. Back then, there were actually two Continental Navy officers, Samuel Shaw and Richard Marvin, who reported their commanding officer, Essex Hopkins, for abusing British sailors. In retaliation, Hopkins had the two imprisoned, but fortunately their courage didn't go unnoticed. They actually petitioned Congress, and Congress took action. And that is actually how the first whistleblowing law was established in 1778 in the United States. And I would wager that it's actually probably one of the earliest whistleblowing laws in the world. Yeah. But maybe you could shed some light on it. What are your thoughts on the story?
Yeah, I mean, it's an amazing story, thinking back that far, especially in the context of, the American, Revolution and people at war, and, think about someone speaking up about that, in that type of context. It had to be incredibly difficult. And then, they were retaliated against, and, then protections were put in place all the way back then. And it's interesting that we're still fighting some of these same battles today. We do now have protections in place, but the issues of retaliation are still there. And the fact that it takes a lot of courage to do that is still there. So we've come a long way in time, but we still deal with some of the same challenges that we were dealing with back then. So, definitely have to, really think through how brave those individuals were. But then, as we go through time, you just see this exact same story kind of repeat itself over and over again, which is why I think today is an important day.
Indeed. So going back to the story a bit, to add a little bit more context, Hopkins, the commander, was actually the Commodore of the Navy, so probably one of the highest figures in the Navy. And as a result, he actually was kind of thrown out of the military. And I think when you talked about courage, it is quite a big thing to, imagine whistleblowing a general. So I think the fear of retaliation, someone so powerful, is quite important thing to consider when it comes to whistleblowing. And I think if we take it back to now, maybe you could tell us why you think that whistleblowing still remains crucial?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I'm not going to go through specific examples, but in the news, there's been plenty of examples where you're running in this exact same scenario. You have people in positions of power who, are doing, the wrong things, whether it be in the political environment or in the corporate environment. And, anyone who's, ever been involved, in these knows, how nerve-wracking that is for that individual to do that. Even when it's anonymous, there's always, questions of, will it remain anonymous? Are they going to try to figure out who I am? I will call one out. You think of that like documentary, like Theranos, it was on HBO. I think most people have seen that. People they reported anonymously, and they spent all their time and money trying to figure out who these people were to shut them up. And so it takes a lot of bravery, and I think you still run into some of the same challenges that people run today. Of you can make laws and everything, but it really does start as a human thing, and it starts with, is the right tone at the top? Do you have the right people in management to carry these things out? I think is still core fundamental problems that we deal with now.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we look at it, when misconduct goes unaddressed, it really creates a lot of uncertainty, lowers morale, but also hurts performance. And I think we looked at maybe you were sharing some examples of an HBO series where it was kind of more on a personal level. But I think we could look at a company as well. When scandals like this happen, it does have an effect on share price. Stocks tank, and people, because of that, also lose jobs based on just basically this lack of transparency.
Yeah, I mean, there's some examples that, in the media now where that's happening, where whistleblowers spoke up. Some of these went, in front of Congress, share price dove, employees leave. Imagine how hard it is to attract talent in that environment. So if you want to hire good people, it's going to cost you. For one, some people just might not work for you. And if you really need people or they're willing to work, are they going to be willing to work for the same price that they were before? So these things have a real material financial impact on a company's bottom line. Not that I think that necessarily should be the focus, but we have to take the world as it is, not how we necessarily want it to be. And the reality is, to get the attention of some people in different organizations or shareholders, that's the truth. If trust deteriorates or if things hit the news, it is going to have a significant monetary impact. And if you're a large publicly traded company, we're not talking about thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions. You're talking 8-9 digits type impact, or sometimes even more.
I think to maybe simplify the financial argument for whistleblowing is basically a figure that says that the cost of dealing with the scandal is nearly 3 times higher than the cost of compliance. Obviously, you don't always know if a scandal is going to happen, but when it does happen, it can be very costly. So having a good compliance process, culture in place can actually be quite better in the long run from the bottom line.
100%. The amount of money is staggering, but even things such as productivity. I know people who have gone through this, and just the effect it has on someone's mental capacity when they know these things are going on. Even if they bury it down, they don't report it, it's impacting how they work. And then that bleeds out to other people. Ultimately, people know this stuff is going on, right? And if no one's talking about it, they're talking amongst themselves. And it's the classic, no reports is, I don't have any reports, right? So my company culture must be fantastic. When really the opposite of that is true. If people feel comfortable speaking up, if you've ever run a business, I run this company. I will think on a day things are going great, and then we'll send out a survey, and if you have the right culture, which I think we do, I get a lot of feedback on, man, there's things that we could really improve on as a company. So we all have our blind spots, and having the right culture where people feel comfortable speaking up about ethical concerns and how we conduct ourselves, or if there is wrongdoing, it's really important. And well-run organizations, they want to know this, because you cannot fix what you don't know about. And ultimately, that gets into the risk conversation of, if people aren't speaking up, then the unknown risk is the biggest risk. Because do you want them to speak up to you, or do you want them to speak up to an external authority? And then you're caught off guard rather than being able to deal with the problem appropriately. But to me, it all goes back to, you can put every tool, training, everything in place. If you don't have the right, leadership promoting this, and you actually carry through on it, it doesn't really matter. So that's really what matters more than anything.
I think I was looking for some kind of statistics to kind of support these arguments, and because it's always nice to just also listen to us chatting, but also to know that it's actually grounded in kind of evidence. And I was looking at the Harvard Business Review found that employees are more than twice as likely to stay with the company when they feel they can trust it from an ethical standpoint. Does that resonate with kind of what you experienced?
Yeah, 100%. I think it's one of the biggest reasons people would leave a company. You'll deal with a lot, but when you start questioning the morality or the ethics of what a company is doing, that's going to make it very difficult to continue. And it's often just one signal amongst many, right? If you have a poor ethical culture, there's probably a number of other issues that are flowing through that's creating stress, that's creating a different environment. That means, people are probably not being dealt with, maybe not even getting the ethics, but are they being dealt with in a way that makes them feel valued as an employee? I think it's a ripple effect when that happens. So I 100% believe that. And when you think of the cost of recruitment, retention, again, it just goes back to, a huge issue. And, there's other statistics that point out, when you have, an ethical setup and you're able to do that, you see, 25% gains in productivity as well, which was from some of that similar research. So it's really worth it to make the investment in these programs. It's often, people aren't praising that you have you're ethical, but you definitely know when it's not there, and that makes an impact. So again, just really points to how important it is to have that type of culture and have the right tools and systems in place to deal with these issues.
But how can organizations kind of overcome these challenges that maybe they don't have the right whistleblowing systems or culture in place?
Yeah, I think, again, a lot of this starts with leadership, at the very top level. When I look at this company, that's me. So am I setting that right tone, and does that cascade into my leadership? Do we actually hold people accountable to that? Like, do you have values? And are they just written on a piece of paper and thrown away? Or does it actually factor into your hiring process? Are you communicative about it? Do you highlight when people, deliver on those values? That's important. But then when you think of having, if we narrow down into having a speak-up culture or whistleblowing culture, do people know that process? I think communication is very, very important. And, these tools, everything says they're anonymous, this, that, and the other, but really putting the effort into the communication awareness campaigns and, talking to people and making sure they do understand this is important. And then there's the localization of everything as well. Our brand is, doing right made easy. Well, doing right can be a relative term, right? Mm-hmm. So, companies need to define what that is to them. What does doing right mean, and make sure that that's aligned across the business and takes in the right sensitivities in different regions, and that everyone understands that throughout the company. Another thing is just making sure these things are easy to access and easy to find. I get shocked at how difficult I find it to be companies. What do they call a speak-up line, integrity line, whatever the branding is. If it's not, I can't go to your website and find it extremely quickly. That's wrong. That's my opinion. You may disagree with me, but I find that's wrong. It should be very easy for people to find and access this. And when they get there, they should understand, if I do this, this is how it's going to play out, and that I feel safe in doing that reporting. Otherwise, people just aren't going to do it.
As we reflect on National Whistleblower Day and the legacy of Shaw and Marvin, I just wanted to ask that if there's any final message that you want maybe our listeners to consider during this day.
Yeah, I think, for people who are listening to this, I would take a wager on you're already ahead of the curve, right? I don't think there's a lot of people tuning into this podcast who aren't trying to promote ethical cultures. I just say don't give up. I'm keenly aware of the challenges that companies face in getting the attention of their business partners and making this a priority. It's difficult. Everyone wants to focus on the numbers of the business and so on, but keep at it, and keep your head down, and don't lose any hope as you go forward. I've worked with a lot of large companies, and I know the budget constraints and resource constraints that everyone deals with, but you're doing the right thing by building these programs. Continue to invest in awareness, communication, getting the right tooling in place, and promoting that type of culture. Even if sometimes you feel like you're going up against the wall or going upstream, every little bit is making an impact. So I've been in this community now for over 10 years, and I can't say I've met someone who's an ethics and compliance professional who doesn't really care about what they do and the impact that it has. And it's easy to get discouraged, but I just encourage everyone to keep charging forward and looking to make that positive change within their organizations.
Okay, well, thank you very much, and happy Whistleblower Appreciation Day.
Absolutely.
Thank you for joining us.